Today our guest is Brad Antill.
I realize that that's where people are. They can understand a simple illustration about being chased by bees.
Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today our guest is Brad Antill. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
I have 2 books here of yours, but you have 4 devotional books. But this is Pines, Prayers and Pelts, and Trees, Traps, and Truths. The first one is Living in the Swamp, and the second one is Decision Making in the Swamp of Life. Now, why is swamp in both of those titles?
Well, in my profession, my occupation, my daily tasks, I work in swamps. The property that I manage and I look after, 80% is what's considered deep swamps, and that is areas that are generally underwater during at least a portion of the year. So that's where I spend my time. And in the process of walking and doing what I need to do in these swamps, which is a lot of logging and looking for various things, God has allowed me to use my daily experiences in these swamps and then relate them to people. And when I first started doing this, as far as some of the people that I would speak with, one of my big audiences was a rescue mission. And about 18 years ago, my family, we began speaking in a local rescue mission. My 2 boys were gifted musicians, so they would go and it would give them a chance to play. And the pastor who ran the mission said, well, you need to share a devotion with them. And of course, the residents and the folks who were coming to the mission, they had to come to the service in order to eat. So they were a captive audience. And when I first began speaking to them, I was using strict Bible-ese because I had been teaching for a long time and I'd been speaking, and there's a vernacular that we use.
Yes. That
is very good if everybody in your audience understands the vernacular. But when you're looking out across an audience of 20 to 30 folks who are living on the street, folks who are fighting addictions, they don't understand the vernacular. And interestingly enough, the way the Lord brought it all to me was one day as I was out in the woods, and I knew I had to be there that evening to speak, and my wife was going to be bringing the boys, and it was timing. We had to make this time. Well, I got lost.
Oh, no.
I got lost, just as lost as I could be. And, of course, I'm a professional.
You're a professional forester, right?
I'm a professional outdoorsman. I work
Right.
outdoors every day, and I got just as lost. I had left my truck and went into a swamp to check on some things, and in the process of going, it was a beautiful day. And foresters on beautiful days, we're looking at trees, we're walking, we're just enjoying being in God's creation. So I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking. So anyways, I got ready to go back to my truck, and I couldn't find the truck. And I was walking, and I was actually looking for a property line, and I could not find it. And I walked, and I said, where in the world? And finally I came up on a river, and I knew where the river was, and I knew that if I was on that river, I was lost. And it would be about an 8-mile hike to get back to my truck. So I said, started walking. Well, I kept walking, and I kept walking, and I kept walking. And 2 hours later, I still wasn't in my truck, and I should have been. So now I'm getting nervous, like, I got to be at the mission. I got to speak, and I don't even know if I'm going to get out of here tonight. But, the Lord finally hit, and I write about this in my first book, so I don't want to, give too much away, but I kept passing one individual tree, which was a cedar tree, and a deer skull. And the third time I passed that cedar tree with a deer skull laying at the bottom, I realized I was walking in circles.
It took the third time
It took the third time that I passed it, and finally the light came on. I said, I am walking in, because I wouldn't admit to it. And the reason why is because I always had the river next to me. And there was no way you can walk in a circle with a river next to you. Well, I finally figured out why and how it happened, but it was an oxbow, and I was just walking an oxbow. Well, when I figured that out, I was in my truck in 7 minutes. It was like I knew right where I was, and I zoomed, I went to truck. And I got to the mission that night just so flustered. Devotion was gone out of my head. It was just, I get in front of the folks, and my boys played, and I was really saying, y'all just play, because I got nothing tonight. And in the process of sitting there, I felt, God was just leading me, just tell them about your day. Just tell them about your day. And so I did, and I shared with the residents and with the addicts that I was lost. And not only was I lost, there was no way I could get out on my own. And it took a river. That river brought me life. And in the process of explaining that I was lost, I could see the recognition in the eyes of the people in the audience, that they were connecting. It wasn't words like, you need to be sanctified. It wasn't words like, you need to be regenerated. It wasn't words that, you needed to have, some sort of, reformation in your life. It was, I was lost.
Yeah.
And just as simple as the song is, I was lost and I was found.
Mm-hmm.
And this to me is what it looked like to be lost. And as I shared with them that night, I said, I should never be lost because I'm a professional. I said, if I can get lost, I said, then you people can get lost. And then I took that and I began to share the gospel in terms of being lost and not being able to find your own way out of the woods.
Yeah.
And so really from that kind of moment on, then I began to approach, every time I would go to the mission, I would begin to use whatever I did that day. And I would wear whatever I wore. If I was covered with mud, if I was, whatever boots I had on, I would be wearing in. If I'd been trapping beavers that day. And what I found was that the folks who would come to that rescue mission just so gravitated toward the stories that they would remember them. And I would come back maybe, the next month to speak, and I would recognize guys who were there perhaps in a program, and they would come up to me and talk to me about the story that I related 4 weeks ago. I couldn't do that in my Sunday school class.
Yeah.
To get them to remember what I spoke about last week. So I subtly began to just change the whole way I taught. I started teaching more from using parables. And of course, as I study and I say, well, that's what Jesus did. And I don't pretend to be able to do it like he does, but he knew his audience. And as he would speak to an audience, if you're, as I mentioned in the Pines book there, that when he was speaking to the crowd about sowing seeds, there were farmers in that group, I can almost guarantee.
Oh, I'm sure.
They understood everything all of his illustrations, they understood. And so when he's talking about seeds, he's talking about people who know how to plant. When he's talking about the vineyards, or when he's talking about the various, traveling, they understood. And so I began to incorporate that in all my speaking, because I realized that that's where people are. They can understand a simple illustration about being chased by bees. You don't ever have to step on a ground bee's nest. I hope you never have. But you can understand what it would be like to step on a ground bee's nest and be chased through the woods as fast as you can run with a horde of bees attacking you. And I've been stung, 80 times at a lick from stepping on bees' nests, and because they're common in the woods. But you don't have to do it. And that's what I found in the books, that the illustrations are, while they're common to me and they're common to people in the industry that I work, the great thing is that everybody can understand them. They can understand a bee. They can understand being in the woods with your boss when the bees hit, as I've had to experience before. And they can understand, what it means to get attacked by flies, perhaps, maybe not to some degree. I'm sure your husband understands what, it means to step out into a horde of flies. And everybody's afraid of a snake.
Yeah.
You don't have to actually step on one to understand that I don't want to mess with them. You don't have to fall on one. And I've had some of those experiences, and, I found that everybody can relate to them, and they can understand that. And then, my job is to listen to the Holy Spirit and say, okay, you gave me this today, Lord, why? And one of the stories in the Pines, Prayers, and Pelts book that is a fire. I was working on a fire. We do a lot of burning, and it was a bad day, and fire kept jumping, and finally we got everything under control. And when I got home that night, I was like a cinder. I was just wore out, and got my shower and passed out. I just lay down in bed, and my wife was doing her Bible reading, and just completely at random. It was just her normal reading for that night, and she just started laughing. And she goes, you got to hear these verses, So she starts reading from Isaiah about God comparing his judgment to a roaring fire that's just going to destroy things. And I had to get out of bed and go find paper and write that down. I said, okay, God, I got you. I said, I can't do the study on it tonight, but thanks for the illustration. And about 6 weeks later, I was able to take that to a congregation and use that day's activities and compare it to the Word of God. So it's a joy each day.
So you teach a Sunday school class
Yes.
at your church,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also go down to the rescue mission.
Yes, and I
That's
do a
great.
lot of I do pulpit fills
Okay.
at different churches, And I've been fortunate to be able to tie in with a youth camp that's in our vicinity. And in particular, every spring they have a father and son retreat.
Oh, neat.
And it's where they bring in about 200 to 200, I think we had 215 this year, fathers and sons. And I've been fortunate enough with my boys, because my boys are more sought after than I am because they're such excellent musicians. But we've been able to run those weekends, and we bring the keynote address on Friday, Saturday, a couple stuff.
Are these at a camp or
Yes.
out in the woods?
Yes, it's in the woods. It's at the camp, and we're able to share books with them and try to encourage dads.
Yeah.
To really take an interest in their sons and in the lives of their sons. And this past spring, it was all about passing the message on to your sons.
That's good. That's what our whole ministry's about.
That's right. And when I saw that, I mentioned to my wife, I said, well, I ought to just bring all my Pony Express stuff, because that weekend we talked about the Pony Express and that message, that mailbag that each rider had to pass. And we encouraged the fathers to say, look, the mail's got to go through. And you can't just let this go. You can't make it a part-time thing. I mean, kids are, if you want that heritage to be passed on to your children, it is full-time. Mm-hmm. And we compared the Pony Express riders, when they had to sign up, they had to sign a waiver that before God they would live honorably. Mm. And on top of that, the riders that they wanted had to be expendable.
Oh, wow.
They preferred orphans. Because they knew that they could die. And they chose children. They wanted kids 14 to 20 years old. And so if you think about the fact that they would take these young people who had nothing going for them because they were orphans, and of course, as we shared with the kids and with the dads that weekend, we're all orphans. We have a Heavenly Father who wants to adopt us. And once we're adopted, then we have a mission, and that's to deliver the message. And it began that weekend as we encouraged the dads. It's got to begin with your son. If you're dropping the ball there, then what's the point? You can go and you can excel in your job, you can be the best there. But if you drop the message to your son or your daughter or your wife, I mean, you're a failure. I mean, that's just pretty much plain and simple. Because our first calling as dads is, okay, I'm a dad, and I've got to take that message and I've got to give it to my children.
Right.
So,
boy, that's a great message. It's too bad you can't propagate it all over the country. That sounds wonderful. Did you grow up as a believer?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so, because the gospel is presented very clearly in your books. Do you think these books would help unbelievers? Like, obviously your stories help unbelievers when you present them.
Yes.
So do you think your books, they'd be able to relate to them?
Yes, I believe that when I first wrote the books, of course, my key audience was foresters. In the Southeast, forestry is the number one profession. It's the number one industry. And that's in the states that go from Virginia down to Florida and across to Alabama and parts of Texas. What I always found interesting, because I grew up in the North, and then when I got my job, I came down here, and you would see in the publications where it would talk about somebody's in the business, it always listed something about their church. It says, like, so-and-so, he's a new timberlands manager, blah, blah, blah. He's a member of, and it would list a church. And I thought, I don't see that anyplace else. You never see somebody in a bank and it lists their church. But it's because in the timber industry, we still have that Bible Belt root. And so as I began to work and I began to run across people, there was this habitual touch to the church, but there was nothing alive in them. And so I felt compelled that the books originally they were to try to relight these fires,
right? To
take it to these guys who had a head knowledge. Yeah, I grew up in church, or mom and daddy go to church. Their life is Sunday morning. Yeah. Sunday afternoon they're working on their logging equipment, and Monday they're right back out in the swamp working someplace. And I've been overwhelmed at times the way God has used some of these simple stories to remind those guys who see those simple stories every day. That they begin to look at things differently.
You're opening their eyes to the things of God.
And it's God's world.
Yeah.
And they work in it. It's like, dude, you work in God's world every day. I said, this you need to be looking for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so, that's been the real joy of it, is seeing that part. And then there's the other joy is when I have people who come up to me who've purchased the books at places where I've sold them and that kind of stuff. And it'll be the 75-year-old grandmother who comes up to me and gives me a hug and says, oh, this so was ministered to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at it like, really? Really? Tell me again which story it was. And she would pick out, this one right here. And it's like, no, ain't no way. But, that's the way God works. There was something in that story that clicked with her.
Mm-hmm.
That it was a simple story. It was, I see it, I follow it. One of the stories in the first book I call Stump Holes. And if you're in the woods a lot, you realize that stumps decay and you step in them, they'll it's like dropping into a manhole.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people who have ripped their knees up, and I've had both of my knees, with surgery because of stump holes. They're tough. But in the story, we took those stump holes as those events in life that they jar you. You're not prepared for them, and they can hurt you. Mm-hmm. And I've been amazed at how many cancer patients or people who've had to deal with losses from cancer have come up to me and they've said, stump holes. Mm-hmm. That's the one that spoke to me.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, okay, that's a stump hole. If you've never been in the woods, you don't know what a stump hole is. So I've always been very thankful that God has given me that ability to explain what a stump hole is in such a way that it could minister to somebody who's never been in the woods.
Are you working on other books right now?
I always say no. I said that after the first one. And really, the impetus for me is when I have opportunities to speak, mm-hmm. and I begin writing notes, and God begins giving me these illustrations, and before I know it, I look up and I say, you
have another book.
I got another book. And I was encouraged by one of the ladies who was in my class. She was suffering from what turned out to be terminal breast cancer, mm-hmm. but she just loved the illustrations, mm-hmm. And she come up to me after a class that I taught, and she said, you have got to be writing these down. She said, that's too good of stuff not to write down. I said, well, I don't know about that. But her words kept echoing. Mm-hmm. And so I began to write these things down, and that eventually became a book. And the sad part about that story is years later, about 7 years later, I saw her son, mm-hmm. After she had passed away, her son in the rescue mission. Oh. And that was a tough for me to get through that, knowing that he was in there because he took her death that hard that he just went on. God's been faithful in allowing me to see some weird things, and then I don't know how I'm able to explain it sometimes, but He's given me those words.
Yeah, you have 4 books now.
Mm-hmm.
There's these 2. What are the other 2 called?
Let's see. The first one is Bibles, Beavers, and Big Timber.
Okay.
Got to stick with the three things. There's got to be something about timber. There's got to be something in there about the animals or the beavers that I deal with. Mm-hmm. And then there's got to be something about there that signifies working with God. Mm-hmm. And then trees, traps, and truths, faith, fur, and forestry.
Okay.
We, in my family, we know them by the colors. There's the yellow book, there's the green book, there's the orange book, and the blue book.
Thank you for being faithful to do what God has called you to do, because it's obvious that you are reaching people that nobody else is reaching because of what you do mm-hmm. and what God shows you through your job, and that's really neat. I'm glad you're doing that. So where can people find you online? Truth
Publishing is the best way to get hold of me at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we're still working towards that whole getting a website thing.
Okay. All right. Well, what you need to do is have kid do it for you.
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
They know what they're doing.
I keep waiting for my oldest son, who's a minister of music and youth right now. But he is, like I said, he's a very accomplished, gifted musician. Mm-hmm. And he keeps having those dreams of wanting to become a record his music. Mm-hmm. And it's like, would you hurry up and do that so you can take me into that world of, of how to do that kind of stuff? But he got some grandkids that slowed him down, and it slowed me down chasing them. So,
right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being our guest.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity to come.
Share